Hello history lovers and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to break down the last week of Catherine Howard's life. On the 7th of February 1542, the Bill of Attainder against Catherine Howard and Jane Boleyn, Lady Rochford, became law. Their fate was sealed. They were to be executed. Both women had been hysterical, Jane more so than Catherine, to the point that it was thought that Jane had gone insane. Not willing to allow either woman to get away with his twisted justice, Henry changed the law that had up until now protected Jane from execution. Henry now made it so that it was legal to execute the insane. Jane and Catherine were denied a trial, although Catherine, as mentioned earlier, was offered some sort of hearing. The Bill of Attainder seemed to satisfy the king, although he felt that the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk should also be convicted of treason for her role in the matter. But the council urged the king to be lenient on the old lady, who was eventually released a few months later in May 1542, but she would die 3 years later. On the 9th of February 1542, Uncle Norfolk arrived at Syon Abbey to inform his niece of her sentence. She begged her uncle to implore His Majesty not to impute her crime to her whole kindred and family, asking instead that Henry extend his unbounded mercy and benevolence to all her brothers, that they might not suffer for her faults. Catherine then asked if she could give her clothing to her female servants after her death, as she had no other way of rewarding them for their loyalty. Norfolk promised to pass on her request to the king, and then left, without informing her of the date of her execution. On the 10th of February 1542, members of the Privy Council arrived at Syon Abbey to transport the Queen to the Tower of London. The calm Catherine flew into a frenzy when she realised why they had arrived, as it reaffirmed that the king did indeed plan to have her executed, and she refused to go. The lords tried everything from persuasion to bullying, but she would not budge. Eventually, she had to be manhandled into the barge, which escorted her to the tower. In the barge was the former queen dressed in a black velvet dress, 4 of her ladies whose job it was to look after her, and the other members of the council. The barge would have sailed under London Bridge, and it is likely that Catherine would have seen the rotting heads of her former lovers, Culpeper and Derham. Not a good sign for Catherine, and I'm sure this encounter was deliberately set up by the king as a twisted way to get back at his adulterous wife. Catherine was greeted by the constable of the Tower, Sir John Gage, who paid her as much honour as when she was reigning. However, it was noted that Sir John was concerned about how much distress Catherine was in, and that she seemed on the verge of collapse. She weeps, cries, and torments herself miserably without ceasing, he wrote to the Privy Council. It's not clear where Catherine stayed during her time at the Tower. However, Alison Weir thinks that it's likely it was the rooms in the Lieutenant's house once occupied by Anne Boleyn. The next day, the 11th of February, the council attached the Great Seal to the Act of Attainder. The phrase, Le Roi le veut, meaning the king wills it, was written at the top. The royal assent, as it was known, was proclaimed as Henry hadn't actually signed the attainder, and without his signature, the execution couldn't go ahead. The council didn't want to distress the king any further, so they took matters into their own hands. The act was then read in Parliament to the assembled members, and the royal assent was proclaimed. The Queen could now be executed. But this proclamation was done on a Saturday, and well, she couldn't be executed on a Sunday. That's the holy day. That would just be wrong. Better do it on a Monday. On the 12th of February 1542, Sir John informed Queen Catherine she was to be executed the following day. Now calmer, she expressed her anxiety about making a dignified impression on the scaffold, and requested that the block be brought to her room so she could practice placing her head on it. Though Sir John found this a strange request, he did not refuse. The block was brought, and Catherine spent the evening coming to terms with her fate, practicing to ensure she maintained her dignity during the execution. It's the 13th of February 1542, the day of Katheryn and Jane Boleyn's executions. It was a cold day, as evident by the frost. The scaffold had been hung with a black cloth and strewn with straw. Katheryn was led out of her lodging by the constable Sir John Gage. Henry Howard, Earl of Surrey, was one of the many in attendance. He noted that the Queen was so weak that she could hardly stand or speak, but she and Lady Rochford made the most godly and Christian end that was ever heard tell of. Katheryn asked all Christian people to take regard unto her worthy and just punishment with death, for her offences against God heinously from her youth upward, in breaking of all his commandments, and also against the King's royal majesty very dangerously. She acknowledged her just condemnation and declared that she deserved 100 deaths, urging the people to see her as an example and to amend their ungodly lives. She implored everyone to obey the King in all things, prayed for her husband, and asked those present to do the same, commending her soul to God and earnestly calling for his mercy. She faced her fate. Unlike her cousin, who was executed with an elegant sword, Katheryn met her end with an axe. As the chronicler Hall confirms, the axe severed her pretty auburn head in a single stroke, just moments after she made her final speech. "I die a queen, but I would rather have died the wife of Culpeper," is the most common quote attributed to Katheryn. However, that was very likely / almost certainly fiction. Sorry, there is no actual account of Katheryn saying this. In reality, her beheading was a mercy, as she could have been burnt. Making such a statement would have also incriminated her family, who were already under scrutiny. The claim that Katheryn Howard uttered those words originates from the anonymous chronicle of King Henry VIII, commonly known as the Spanish Chronicle, which was translated from Spanish and edited by Martin Hume. Therefore, the chronicler's attribution of these words to the Queen should be regarded with great scepticism. Lady Rochford followed Katheryn to the block. According to Chapuis, she was still in a frenzy. However, when faced with the axe and the sight of the Queen's blood-soaked remains being wrapped in a black blanket by her sobbing ladies, she regained enough composure to make an edifying speech before submitting to the executioner. Katheryn's attendants placed her remains in a coffin and carried it to the nearby chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula. Later that day, she was buried near Anne Boleyn. Her name was subsequently forgotten until 1553, when Queen Mary reversed the Act of Attainder against her. As these acts did not bear the royal signature, they were no longer recognised as legal. Although she had her title of Queen stripped, the marriage of King Henry VIII and Katheryn Howard was never formally annulled, so technically Henry became a widower upon her death.
Right.
After Katheryn's death, Henry was in no rush to remarry. Chapuis speculated that he would only do so if Parliament urged him. The ambassador wearily noted that few ladies at court would aspire to such an honour due to the new act, which required any lady the king might marry to declare any charge of misconduct against her on pain of death. This considerably narrowed the field, as the ladies of Henry's court were not exactly known for their virtue. And that is the life and death of Katheryn Howard, the fifth wife and queen of King Henry VIII. If you enjoyed this video, then please make sure you like and subscribe if you haven't already, and if you really like this video, then why not leave a super thanks. I have videos on Henry's other wives and queens and other Tudor consorts, such as Queen Elizabeth of York, and even the monarchs themselves, so go check them out. Or if Tudors aren't your thing, which would be very strange considering what you've just watched, why not go check out my other videos on the Windsors or the French monarchy? But until the next one, guys, have a wonderful day.